Welcome to EPG Padashala. I am Professor B. Hariharan from the Institute of English, University of Kerala. The paper that we are looking at is 20th century English literature, and the module that we are discussing now is James Synge's play The Playboy of the Western World. We will begin with the Irish Renaissance. The Irish Renaissance was a cultural phenomenon of the early part of the 20th century. This Renaissance was allied to the national movement of Ireland. Ireland, we must remember, was at that time a colony of Britain. What did that imply? What were the implications of this nationalist movement? It signified, first of all, a revival of interest in Ireland's Gaelic literary heritage. This movement was also identified or even known as Gaelic revival. Now, this happened as a result of the retelling of ancient heroic traditions of Ireland through works like Standish O'Grady's History of Ireland in the last part of the 19th century, another work by Douglas Hyde, A Literary History of Ireland, again at the fag end of the 19th century. These are two texts that are often cited. The Gaelic League, which was formed in 1893, pioneered Gaelic revival. What it also led to immediately was the Irish theatre movement. Now, the Irish theatre movement has the pride of place when we look at the Irish Renaissance. There are four main features of the Irish Renaissance. They are identified as four distinct movements. They are the nationalist movement, the literary movement, the socialist movement, and the suffragist movement. We will very briefly indicate what these movements are, very briefly. The nationalist movement, for instance, used theatre to establish a strong sense of national identity. Now, the literary movement was aimed to counter English hegemony by a return to Irish language, mythologies, and its heroic traditions. Now, it's in this context that we need to remember, we need to remind ourselves that W.B. Yeats had asked James Synge to go and visit the Aran Islands, to look at the people, to look at the culture which gave these writers nourishment. As a result of this travel, Synge published a book called The Aran Islands. And when we read the Aran Islands, this book, we would understand that many of the plays that he wrote, many of these folk tales that figure in that island, many of the stories that he had heard, all that is presented in this, and this forms the material for many of his plays. So this is a very valuable source book that we have to possibly refer to understand something of these movements also. The socialist movement, this was fused on the working class. It was primarily a working class movement, and mostly peasants under the influence of communism in the second decade of the 20th century figured here. So this was some kind of a social mass movement of the ordinary people, of the working class. The last movement is the suffragist movement. Now, this empowered women and enabled them to vote. This was this demand for this right to vote. Before we look at certain important political figures allied to the Renaissance, I think it's important that we look at the whole question of Irishness and the problems that are there. When we talk about Irishness, it would be useful to remind ourselves of W.B. Yeats and this essay that he wrote, Ireland and the Arts. Now, in this essay, Yeats sought to reform Irish dramatic practices, because for him, theatre was to be a place of intellectual excitement. It was a place where the mind goes to be liberated. So there is this renewal, there is a spirit that is emphasized, is underlined in this call of freedom. What it also did was, what it also was doing was to promote the importance of speech and lyricism in theatre. Now, this is what we get to witness in the play that we'll be discussing, the Playboy of the Western World. We would see that in other plays written by Irish playwrights. Now let's look at the political figures. Some of these names are familiar to us, some may not be that familiar. Charles Stewart Parnell. This is a name that you would have come across when you did your lesson on James Joyce. Douglas Hyde, Thomas MacDonagh, who was one of the leaders of the Easter Rising in 1916. There is a poem written on this uprising. You have a list of a number of leaders who are remembered in this poem. This is a poem titled Easter 1916 by W.B. Yeats. There is Standish O'Grady and Oliver St. John Gogati. These were some of the political figures. Now, who are the cultural figures of the Irish Renaissance movement? Of course, we have to mention W.B. Yeats, Lady Gregory, George Moore. There was a painter in this group, George Russell. There was, of course, Austin Clarke, Seamus O'Sullivan, F.R. Higgins, Oliver St. John Gogati, we have mentioned that. Shaw, Bernard Shaw, who was not directly involved with Irish nationalism, Wilfred Blunt, Frederick Robert Higgins, Edward Plunkett, T.C. Murray, Lennox Robinson, the playwright Sean O'Casey, Edward Martin, Padraig Colum. These were some of the very important cultural figures of Ireland during that time. I want you to look at the visuals and try and identify, recognize some of the important founders of the Abbey Theatre. Now, the founding of the Abbey Theatre was in Dublin was a very, very important landmark, milestone for the Irish Renaissance. Lady Gregory and Yeats were the patrons of the Abbey Theatre. Look at the visual of the Abbey Theatre. You have the outside of the Abbey Theatre, and then of course you have the interior. It's an old, very old structure, and it's a typical English structure. You have the sketch here. Take a look at the theatre. In its heydays, the Abbey Theatre provided a vital forum for the Irish nationalist movement. Along with other theatres, it helped to establish Irish culture back on its foot. It can be rightly said that the Abbey Theatre was the finest expression of Irish culture at that time. It will be good if you can look at the visual that we have, the playbill of the Playboy of the Western World that you have here. It will be good if you can take a good look at this visual that we have. What are the landmarks of the Abbey Theatre history? Now, in 1899, the Irish Literary Theatre was founded by Lady Gregory, Edward Martin and W.B. Yeats. In 1903, the Irish National Theatre Society was formed. In 1904, it was opened to the public. And this was followed in 1904 again in December by the production of 3 one-act plays. Almost a month after that, the Playboy of the Western World was staged there for the first time. The play was performed, as I said, in 1903 in January 26th. Once the play started, there were riots, and this is known now in history as the Playboy riots. This was the immediate result of the play, because there were some references in this production which some people found to be quite offensive. There were certain expressions that they could not accept. Religious sentiment was an issue, and all this put together, there was a section which thought that this play was an insult of the Irish people. Now, they thought that this play slighted Irish womanhood. Now, there was a line in this play which was the bone of contention, as it were. The line goes like this: a drift of females standing in their shifts. A drift of females standing in their shifts. Now, the problem was with the word shifts, because among the Irish women, a shift referred to female undergarment. So this was the problem. Now, the play also was accused of exploiting certain stereotypes, etc. But then the riot spread, but the Irish intellectual circle rallied behind the playwright, and so what could have spilled over into the streets and become a major issue did not happen, and the play did have a successful run. However, there were some people who very much believed that this play glorified parricide. Parricide is killing one's own father. So there was this view also kind of prevalent at that point. Now, these rioters were led by Arthur Griffith, a Sinn Féin leader. Now, he thought that the play was a vile and inhuman story told in the foulest of language. Now, we'll have to watch the play to decide for ourselves whether it's written in a foul language or it's a vile story, etc. The most important thing is that people like Yeats and others came to the press and they condemned the riots. Now, this is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, let us look at the setting of the play. It's set in County Galway. It's located on the western coast in the province of Connacht. You will see pictures of this place in the visuals that you have. I will very briefly give you the plot summary of the play. Any attempt to give a detailed summary, I have refrained from that, because that will take away the fun that the play has and the wit that the play has and the way in which characters emerge through the actions and the way in which they talk, their speech. This is a play where you see how a young man makes himself into a hero by just talking about something he claims to have done, and he becomes a hero. The story is like this. There's a young man named Christy Mahone who arrives in this place as a fugitive from the police, claiming that he has killed his father. This is a claim. Now, the peasants would like to hear the story, and they make him a hero. There's a barmaid, a very beautiful barmaid, Peggy Mike, who is the daughter of the barkeeper, who's Mr. Flaherty. She falls in love with him, and because she feels that this person is a hero, because he has been telling them what he did. He killed his father, he said, and how he did it. And he becomes a hero, and she falls for him. And she gives up her fiancé, Sean Q. But what happens is that the dead father turns up to capture Christy, who tries to kill him a second time. But then he fails. Christy fails. He now loses his heroic aura. He is shunned by everyone, even his new girlfriend, Peggy. She now thinks that he is a liar and a coward. Now he leaves with his father. Peggy refuses Sean's offer of marriage. She is still feeling the loss of the playboy of the Western world, because there is only, as Peggy would say in the play, there is only one playboy of the Western world. Now this, in a nutshell, is the story. What we will do now here is to make a very quick remark about what this theatre, Synge's theatre, tried to do. If he provoked his audience politically and emotionally, it was a result of his ability to implicate the audience in the action that's unfolding on the stage. Now this is what marks him as a playwright. On the one hand, he is critical of the encroaching modernity of Ireland, and at the same time he provokes the bourgeois audience out of their complicity in this process. So there is this critique of this encroaching modernity in Ireland, and of course a provocation of the bourgeois audience out of their complicity. Now this is what he does in this play. Let us now look at the characters in this play. Christopher Mahon, Old Mahon, Michael James Flaherty, Philly Cullen, Jimmy Farrell, Margaret Flaherty, she is Peggy Mike, Sean Keogh, Widow Quinn, Sarah Tansey, Father Reilly, and Kate Cassidy. Now what I have done is listed out the names of characters. Now to know more about these characters, it suggests that you look at the word text that is available with this material. Now let us very quickly look at the title. The name Playboy refers to Christy Mahon. It's not used in the way in which we now understand the word Playboy. The word here means or refers to a romantic swashbuckler, a very handsome person, a daredevil, an idler, or a play actor, or even a poser, a person who claims that he is something that he is not. That is a poser. So a playboy could be any of these things, or it could be a playboy, could be a combination of all this. Now this definition of the playboy fits Christy Mahon very much. Now we understand this when we look at the way he enters the bar, and the way he sits down, or the way in which he talks, his behavior, etc. So this is the playboy. He is the playboy. There's only one playboy, as Peggy would say. What are the major themes that we have in this play? Now here again, what I'm going to do is list out some of the major themes and very briefly indicate something of the theme. This is a comedy with a whole lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of action and there is fun and laughter. This play provides an insight into rural Irish life in the turn of the century. So in other words, it tells you a lot about Irish society at the turn of the century. So this is another theme that you have in the play. Storytelling is another very interesting thing. Why is it that we tell stories? We tell stories, let us say, to while away time. We listen to stories to escape boredom of everyday existence. So this is another theme in this play, to escape from boredom or ennui of routine existence. This is another theme. Now this is what we get to see when all these people at the bar want to listen to something that is kind of unnatural. The fact that here is a fugitive from law who has, as he claims, killed his father and is on the run. Another theme here is, another thing that you have in this play is the satire on the naivety and the credulity of the peasant class. We said that this is a comedy, and certainly it has a lot of satirical elements. There is also a very significant, a very important theme of initiation or growing up. There is this young man, this is the way in which he grows up. Now look at this young girl here who falls for him. She has a crush on him. This is growing up thing. Look at all the young people in this play. This is the story of initiation, and therefore it has certain overtones of sexuality as well into it, though it's very, very subtly hinted. The other theme that of course is quite obvious is the theme of violence. I said in the beginning that there were readers, there was an audience that very much believed that this play was in some ways promoting parricide. Well, there is a lot of violence in this play. We will now look at the style employed in this text. A very colorful language is used. The imagery is rich and vivid. The dialect, the colorful dialect of Mayo County Irish that we hear in this play is a reworking of the syntax and vocabulary of Gaelic. The dialogues that you have are rich, replete with authentic Western Irish regionalisms and vulgarisms. This will take us to the Playboy riots. Now we know why you have those expressions there, which was not palatable to some people. Synge's language here is a product of the intimacy that he had with the peasant folk of the remote regions of Ireland. I had indicated earlier on his visit to the Aran Islands and the way in which he drew a lot from the folk narratives of the people of the Aran Islands. As I said earlier, almost all his texts, all his plays were deeply inspired by those narratives. So it's not just the language, the theme, the folk element that you have, the music, the cultural markers, all are indebted thematically and stylistically to the peasant folk of the remote regions of Ireland. We will now look at the use of imagery and humor. The imagery that he uses recreates the cultural milieu of the West Coast. The humor that you have here grows out of, obviously, the dialogues. There is humor also in terms of character peculiarities. That's something related to the use of satire in this play. As an example, we need to look at this young man who was the fiancé, who's ditched. He is naive and timid. This is what really marks off Sean. There's a lot of humor there when we look at Sean on stage. There is irony in this text. For example, Pegeen and Christy are talking. There is a scene where the two of them are talking, and Pegeen cannot believe this. She asks, "Is it killed your father? Did you kill your father?" And look at what Christy says. He says, "With the help of God, I surely did, and that the Holy Immaculate Mother may intercede for his soul." Look at this. Here is this young man saying that he killed his father with the help of God. Look at the irony there. And then he prays that the Holy Immaculate Mother may intercede for the soul of his father. Right? So that's the use of irony that you have in this text. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to conclude this presentation by summing up the elements of Irishness here. So this is an out and out Irish play. So we will try to sum up some of those qualities that identify this, that make this an Irish play. It has to do with the setting, number one. We have seen this. It's the setting, very Irish. The language. and the rhythm that the language has, the customs and practices. For example, the references that are there to the wake that is held. The very term wake itself is very, very Irish. Alcohol addiction and sexual jealousy, we have seen that. Poverty. And then we have here a playwright who provides a very stark look at the life of the Irish peasant without any adjectives, without any frills, without any padding. As a playwright, Synge does not deal with urban life, and he has always projected the life of ordinary people. And here it is the Irish peasant. These are the things that come together to make this into an out and out Irish text, Irish play. To understand the nuances of the humor, to understand the satire, the irony here, to get a flair of the language that he uses, it will be good if you can take up the book Aran Islands, read that, and then come and read Playboy of the Western World, because that is an immensely rich and rewarding experience. Thank you.